In the previous part, we have finished the game where you can click the animal to earn the currency, and also you can merge them to get a new animal of the next level. But we still haven't implemented the save load and reset buttons, so when I refresh the page, I lose all the progress. So let's learn how to save our state in the browser, and for that we will use JSON files. So at first, let's discuss how our project works in the browser. We have three main files: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Our HTML and CSS are static, but our JavaScript adds the functionality to communicate with our game. Eventually, I can click buttons and our animals, and then on the page you see how our currency counter changes. On the page you see only HTML and CSS. Even though that now you see another counter, our initial HTML file stays the same. And eventually, when I refresh this page, you see a new state of this game that was created from our initial files. Our files are connected to the browser, and our browser can ask these files again. Actually, we might have many users. So each user is a separate session that shares the same initial files. And then this user can communicate with our game to change the state of this game. So if we want to save this state, we can't save it inside of our initial files because it will influence other players of our game. So for example, I have this initial game, and when I buy a new animal, you see that the state of this game have been changed. And if then I save this state inside of our initial files, other users will see the same change on their pages. And this is the reason why we can't save our changes directly inside of our initial files. If we can't save it inside of these files, let's think, what is another place where we can save these changes? I added icons of other browsers to give you a clue. Actually, each user has its own browser. Even though that I showed three different browsers can be of the same instance. For example, all our users can use only Chrome browser. But the most important here is that each user downloads a browser directly to their device. So it means that all users have instances of their own browsers. And I can easily prove it because now I am in the Chrome browser and I can create a new tab, but you will not see this tab on your browser. So it means that I have the instance of my own browser that is saved on my computer. Actually, each browser has its own storage where we can save some data or files. Now we need to figure out what we need to save. At first you might think that we must save the copies of our initial HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. But actually it will not work because imagine if I want to create a new update for my initial files. Then it means that this user that stores the copies of my old application will always use the old application. Let's think what we change when we interact with our game. So all changes happens because of our script.js file. So actually when users interact with our page, they change only the game data, and then our JavaScript file recreates the HTML based on this game data. So it means that it would be enough for us to save only this data inside of the browser. So it means that I can store only my variables, but actually I can't store my variables directly. I need some kind of format for storing our data, and this format is called JSON. So at first let's create a JSON file. For that I create a new file with the name storage and with the type JSON. Initially this file is empty, and now let's add some data that we want to store. So for example, let's store the counter of our currency. Let's call this variable poop, but if I write it, I will see the error that expected a JSON object. The JSON stands for JavaScript object notation. So it means that it uses the same syntax as objects in JavaScript. So this is an object in JavaScript, so we need to use the same syntax. So we need to start from the curly braces. So and then we know that JavaScript objects contain key value pairs. So let's write a pair poop that is equal to 10. If I just write poop, I will have the error that property keys must be double quoted. So this is the first difference between objects in JavaScript and JSON. In JSON, I always must put quotes for keys, and then I can write column 10. In the same way as in JavaScript, we are using column instead of the equal sign for showing that 10 is the value of the key poop. So and this is the easiest JSON file where we stored only one key value pair. So let's add another property, for example best level. If I start typing a new key, you will see the error that expected comma. So it means that all my key value pairs must be separated with comma. So the value of the best level is 1. Also, if I try to put the trailing comma, you will see the error. Also, we can store other data types like arrays and objects. For example, I wrote board, which is equal to array of nulls. In our game, we have 16 cells, but here I wrote only 2. And then, for example, let's store a pet, which is equal to a new object. Now I can expand this object, and here I can write new key value pairs. So for example, I can write name level and reward. There are also some data that we can store. For example, we can store undefined. Inside of the board, if I try to write undefined instead of the null, you will see an error. So JSON can store only nulls, but can't store undefined. Also, we can store or call any functions. And this is because JSON is not like a JavaScript. This is similar to text files. So for example, I can open a notepad and here I can write console.log. So, and nothing will happen, and this is because all lines that we write inside of the txt file are just strings. So this is the same as writing console.log in JavaScript with quotes. The main difference between JSON and text files is that JSON has a specific structure, so this is easy to extract the data from the JSON. So now you know the basic syntax of JSON, so let's look how to work with it in the browser. At first, I have a simple web page with index.html, with style.css and with empty script.js files. And then I connect to the browser by using the live server extension. So now here I see our web page that contains nothing, and let's open the console. So now let's write the first console log to see that our JavaScript is connected to the browser. So I see the response in the console, so it means that our application is connected. We connect all our files to our HTML file. And here, as you see, only our style.css and script.js files are connected. So we don't connect our JSON file. And this is because we don't have any initial JSON that we share with all the users, and we store JSON directly inside of each browser. So let's find the place where our JSON is located. For that, in the browser, you need to find this double arrow icon, and then you need to find the application option. So I opened my application, and here on the left side, you can see the storage. So we need to find the local storage. Now we can expand it, and then we will find a local storage for our local host. So this is the place where we will store our variables. As you see, we have a small table with key and value. So this is the representation of our JSON. So now inside of the JavaScript, let's write our first variable that we will store. So let's store our currency, but currently this currency is just a variable in JavaScript. At first we need to create a JSON string. For that, let's create a new variable poop.json, and then we have the built-in JSON object, and if you write dot, you will see two methods that this object has. So we will use the stringify method, and here I can pass the value that I want to stringify. So let's write the name of our variable poop. And also let's log to the console both these variables to see the difference. I return back to my console, and here I see two variables. So our poop is equal to a number 10, and our poop.json is equal to string of the 10. So simply it means that json.stringify converts all the data types into the strings. So no matter how complex our structure is, it will anyway convert our variable. Until your variable doesn't contain undefined or functions, the json.stringify will be able to convert it. And now let's save it in our local storage. So for that we have an object LocalStorage. And this object has several methods, so you need to find the set item. Now this method expects two parameters, key and value. If you look to our JSON, you will find that this is the key of our variable poop, and this is the value of the same variable. So let's pass them. And now let's open our application tab, and here you can see that in the table we have our first variable poop, which is equal to 10. Actually we created this simple JSON file. So and now let's do the opposite steps to get our variable from the local storage. So at first I need to write local storage, and then I need to find the getItem method. This method expects only one parameter, which is the key. So let's write poop. this line will return the poop JSON. So let's store it inside of this variable. And now let's convert it back to our initial variable. For that, I will use the JSON.parse function. And now let's log to the console this variable. So in the console, you can see that we have the 10, and the type of this 10 is a number. So it means that we successfully load the data from our storage. Now let's also wrap this code into the save and load functions. I also found that inside of the save function, we use the hard-coded value 10, but actually I want to provide the poop JSON variable. And let's also write the load function. Now I wrapped our code inside of the functions. So let's also change these functions a little bit. So let's create a global variable poop. And then let's create the global variable poop.json, which is equal to null. And now inside of our functions, we just reassign our values. Inside of our local storage, we have the pair poop, which is equal to 10. And no matter how much I refresh this page, this value will be here until the user manually deletes it. But if you want to manually delete some pairs from the local storage, you can click on your pair and then you can press delete button, or you have a button clear all. So now you see that we have no values, and at first let's save our initial value. So for that, I call the save function. Now let's imagine that our user earns the currency. So a new value of our currency is 100. So let's store a new value of our currency. So as you see, in the local storage we have poop, which is equal to 100. And now let's imagine that our user refreshes the page. So we return back to the initial value, which is 10. But at this point, we can call the load function. And as you see in the console, no matter that the initial value of the poop is equal to 10, we loaded the previous state of our game. And in the same way, you can store complex data like arrays and objects. In the next video, we will implement the save load and reset buttons using the knowledge that you learned today.